I appreciate the kind introduction. We're going to be talking a lot about community in your career today. And so I'll give myself a brief introduction first. Here's the busy slide, but the interesting things there, of course, are me holding a giant fish. I happened to catch that up in Idaho. I love fishing. Professionally as a career, I've worked in software development. So fishing gets to be the hobby, the fun thing that I get to do and supported by my career. Currently, I'm a web systems manager at Sundance, specifically Sundance Catalog. There's actually 3 Sundance companies in Utah. Pretty much everyone's familiar with the film festival that happens. That's through the Sundance Institute in Park City. And Sundance Resort up Provo Canyon is where a lot of that also goes on, and people love to go skiing and enjoy the beautiful nature that's up there, and Sundance Catalog. And we all call ourselves Sundance. We're all independently owned, and the film festival loves to come steal our furniture to make sure people have seating at the film festival, and we get some benefits at the resort. And so we're all just one big happy family that somehow works together. So I also founded my own consulting company a little over 20 years ago that I continue to do a little on the side work today. And it's been a great vehicle for me to learn new things and support my involvement in the community. And speaking of the community, I currently serve on the board for Utah Geek Events that's putting on this conference. And we appreciate everybody coming out and helping us, especially in this virtual world that we're living in, where, I miss being at the conferences where we would get to be in person and visit and hang out in the hallway. So I'd encourage you to explore the LoudSwarm platform, join us in Slack. We've got a great kind of after party tonight where we're going to be hanging out in the hallway, and some fabulous prizes will be available there too. So be sure to join us. Beyond that, going back a little bit, I have been the president of a number of user groups here locally in Salt Lake City as well, including founding the Power Apps one and running the SharePoint Office 365 and Dynamics user groups. I've got a fairly large digital footprint, so you're welcome to find me online. Twitter works great, or LinkedIn. And as most of my career, I've been a developer. I've got a pretty good profile on Stack Overflow, so you're welcome to go look at my answers there and critique them. A lot of them are now like 10 years old, and so I sometimes wonder if they're even relevant anymore. But they're still there, and it's a great place to kind of be part of a community. And I love to show this slide because that name, Goyuix, is actually a made-up Spanish name, and it comes kind of from Goku, who was really popular when I was in Mexico a little over 20 years ago. And people think I must have somehow resembled him. I don't know if it was the long hair or the rippling muscles or what, but Greg in Spanish is Goyo. And so you kind of combine Goyo and Goku, and you ended up with that weird-looking Goyu with an IX at the end of it. But I still think I look a lot like Goku, in my head. So even though I probably more resemble the Utah Teapot at this point. But switching gears, talking about what we're here today for, community and career paths. Where do we even find these things? So the community, 2 of the biggest places and best places to go join communities are either on Meetup or Eventbrite. You can look and just see what's going on in your area. There are meetups all around the United States, around the world. Same thing with Eventbrite. A lot of them are free, not all of them are free, but you can definitely find something that will be of interest to you and help you kind of grow and develop. And find your tribe. Like, one of the things that was always interesting running the SharePoint user group is I'd see the Stack Overflow developer survey, and let's just say it didn't do well as far as most loved technologies. In fact, it was on the most dreaded list. And so finding that tribe where you find like-minded individuals that can support you and answer questions is really an important thing. So be sure to check those communities out. I mentioned Stack Overflow. I also mentioned GitHub because those are great places where you can start creating digital artifacts that kind of link back to you as a person. And that really helps you in building your career because there are things that you can point out. You think of, your tech career like an artist. A lot of what we do is very creative problem solving and other things. You would never hire an artist without looking at their portfolio. And so being able to have a digital footprint where you can show some of the work you've done, the things you've learned, is super, super valuable. I've sat in thousands of interviews with people, and I can tell you just from, going through resumes or talking to people, if there's a digital footprint, we can look at, it immediately vaults you ahead of the competition. So that's one thing I would really encourage people to do, is to be able to participate in those communities. Just as an example, I pulled in a couple of screenshots of my LinkedIn profile. It's a little bit dated. This was from earlier this year. Same thing with the Stack Overflow profile and CV that's listed there. But one of the things that I've done is very intentionally set some goals around what I would like to do in these platforms and how I'd like to see them grow and how they can benefit me in my career. And I can tell you right now, LinkedIn is really becoming a very dominant place for a lot of career stuff where people post jobs. They certainly will want to look at your profile. People love to do the networking. I think it's also a great way for that kind of second degree network to say, hey, I don't know somebody who's a great fit for this job myself, but I bet, somebody else does. That's, just one network connection away. And so being able to leverage that network effect is really, really valuable. Looking at the Stack Overflow stuff, it's a great way to kind of introduce yourself and link and kind of consolidate a bunch of different things. You're able to have what your preferred technologies are and different places where you're answering good questions. A lot of the things that I answered on Stack Overflow are related to PowerShell, and I've loved it my entire career since it's been around anyway. It was really kind of a game-changing thing for me. But maybe that's not right for everybody. So find what it is for you that draws your passion out and participate actively in those communities. And speaking of that, this is a screenshot from a good friend of mine. His name's Blake Wilson. He is a recruiter at Pluralsight, but you don't know that immediately from his profile. It says recruiter and culinary educator. He loves food. He is a big time foodie. In fact, he's invited us over to his house a number of times for different food parties. When Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild came out, he wanted to cook a whole bunch of recipes basically from the game. And I gave him crap about, do you want to cook lizard tails and other weird things? He's like, no, this is more like, mushrooms and meat and things like that. So, but it's really interesting for him as a recruiter to have kind of this fun, whimsical profile. It, really kind of helps break the ice. He doesn't give off that evil recruiter vibe. In fact, he addresses that in the first 4 words. And so he's been really successful. I mean, it helps probably that he works for Pluralsight, where a lot of people want to go work. But, it helps really kind of diffuse that initial contact saying, what, wait a minute, how is this going to happen? And, rather than immediately talking about Pluralsight, he talks about Ninja Turtles and that he's a real person and so on and so forth. And so it's really, a different approach to kind of that recruiting game. And my advice around that would be do the same in your own profile. Like make it be the kind of profile that gets you the job that you want to have. So do you want to work, somewhere that's a little more straight-laced? Well, you should probably have something that's a little tighter, a little more professional. You want to work at a really kind of loose, fun startup. Well, then, something more like this is probably going to line up better with finding that type of a job and be appealing to those sort of people. And kind of on the flip side of that, this is a job posting for a company that I'm really familiar with. This is one that I actually considered applying for, and I think they kind of wanted me to, but it wasn't ideal from a location standpoint. But the thing that I absolutely loved about it was this was the result of them reading a book called Hire with Your Head by Lou Adler. And he said you should be really intentional with your hiring process, everything from drafting out the job posting and description to how you actually go about interviewing and ultimately hiring individuals. And the thing that I love about this is there are 5 bullet points that describe what you're going to do. And if we peel it apart, we can easily see that it's still got all of those important keywords. It would be similar to a job posting where it says, you're an ideal candidate if you have the following skills, Visual Studio, Dynamics, SharePoint, OData, C#, those sorts of things. But if you read that, like that's a super boring posting. Like it doesn't make you want to apply for the job. Whereas something like this, it's like, hey, here's what you're going to be expected to accomplish in the first 12 to 18 months. So right off the bat, you have an idea of what those first year or two of your employment is going to look like. And then they describe exactly the type of projects that are going to happen using the keywords that they need. So, if you're searching for a job with Azure or Dynamics or whatever it might be, that it still shows up in your searches. But yeah, it's just such a better way of posting a job. And so I would say, even just when you're evaluating like an employer where you may want to go work, look at how they post their job, and you'll have an idea of what the hiring process will be like. And you can kind of tailor your approach to working with that employer to fit the kind of employee that they're looking for. Ultimately, you want to make sure you're a good fit and they're a good fit. But these are some clues that can kind of help you do a little bit better when you're looking at these sorts of things. I wanted to stop for just a second after saying all of that and think about your resume. So we've talked about recruiters reaching out to you. We've talked about what a job posting might look like, and think about your resume that you're going to send in. And this is really just more of a thought question. What is the difference between a resume and an obituary? The obituary, it's very much a past tense sort of thing. I don't want to dwell on like an unhappy death topic or anything like that, but it's very much looking backward in time. Whereas your resume really should present, really who you are today, and also what you want to accomplish in the future. Just like that job posting at Wavetronics showed what they expected in the next year or two, ideally your resume should be kind of geared towards, hey, here are my goals and objectives and how I'm able to find my satisfaction, my rewarding employment that happens to line up with the needs that your business has. Everybody wins in that sort of situation. And so thinking about your resume as kind of that forward-looking vehicle can be a really powerful thing that will make you stand out during the job application process. It definitely has a lot of the same thing. You got to have your basic contact info. You've got to say, why am I qualified to do this? You've got to kind of, say what you've done in the past, obviously. But there's a lot of opportunity to say, well, what am I doing now? Like, do I volunteer somewhere? Do I participate in the local tech community? Do I present at conferences? Do I attend them? What am I doing? And it really makes a difference. So I'd encourage everybody to get involved and help out. I've got a number of kids right now that are in the process of either attending or going to the university. And one of the things that is an interesting comparison there is, for a lot of the scholarships, they want to see not just your academic performance, but what were the extracurricular things you were doing. And I feel like that kind of gets lost as we transition, from K-12 education to the university, and then the university to the workforce. And maybe you don't even go to the university, but I think, as someone in the workforce, seeing some of that extracurricular stuff, once again, will really set you apart and make all the difference in getting the job or getting an offer or getting an interview. And the other things to do, obviously, like make a personalized cover letter, make sure you have a digital presence, digital footprint out there on the internet that people can see what you are all about. So with that, I wanted to shift gears a little bit, having established that context, and talk about how that's followed me through my career path. I've been in technology for a little over 20 years now, and I'd like to think I've learned a thing or two along the way, and would kind of like to share what that has looked like for me personally. This is my journey. Your journey is going to be different, obviously. It doesn't have to be the same, but hopefully there's a few things there that might help you as you're kind of evaluating what your career choices are and what you want to do, and the things that you can do now to be ready for that next step whenever that comes in your career path. So I mentioned that I had started my own consulting company. That was back in August of 1998. And I co-founded it with my brother. There was actually a separate company first, but co-founded with my brother in September of 2000. And primarily we built white box computers. So those are just custom built. You buy all your parts from, then Newegg or M-Wave or other distributors, and put them together. You would be the one providing, the warranty and the service and everything else. And it was a great business at that time because the Dells and HPs and other, Lenovo's, et cetera, of the world hadn't really figured out kind of the mass market, low cost approach to building computers. And so we were able to really do a great job competing on price with them for the most part. But that started to erode away, not long after the dot-com boom and bust. They had kind of figured out that they needed to do low cost. They had really aggressive, pricing with Microsoft to include a Windows license. And so that was like $100 right there that they could beat us on. and they were able to source parts, at the same cost or often much less. And so suddenly it became this place where we really could only compete at the higher end. And to this day, I still build custom computers for Alpha Graphics and a few other consulting gigs that I have. But it's very, very few and far between, and very kind of specialized needs where it makes a lot of sense. And so how have I been able to survive as a company for over 20 years? Basically had to switch to a software and services model where instead of providing the hardware, it's like, okay, well, what services can we provide? Can we help set up your network? Can we help connect you to the internet? Can we set up your email? Can we do your monthly patching? Can we do whatever? Can we help you in evaluating your printer choices or signing a contract to get service and maintenance on a giant copier? Like any of the technology things that touch a company, which is increasingly pretty much everything. Kind of fill in that fractional like CTO or CIO role for a number of these companies. And it's been great to continue to work with them. I still have probably a handful of companies that I work with on a regular basis, just kind of on a consulting sort of thing. And it's wonderful to be able to help them. The other thing that's been super helpful in running my own business is teaching me a lot about how businesses work. Which includes the tax advantages and disadvantages. It's been nice to have a consulting business where if I want to go speak at a conference, that can become a business expense. It's also taught me, how I need to market and advertise to grow the business, and most importantly, how to work with the customers and listen to their needs and follow it. One side thing there is just following the market rates. Like, am I charging what makes sense, both for my own time as well as being competitive with other companies that are out there? Should they even be continuing to use my services or not? So there's been a lot that I've been able to learn, running my own business, and it may not be for everyone, but it's definitely been a very positive thing in my life, and I'd encourage you to investigate it if it's something that you're at all interested in.
Greg, I'm going to jump in really quickly because there was a great
Andrea.
comment in the chat. Tracy DeMarco White said, just reinforcing what Greg is saying, in my talk I mentioned my volunteer work with NetBSD, Package Source, OpenAFS, etc. as part of my bio, and they are how I got where I am. So
That's
yeah,
absolutely true. So definitely. And so NetBSD, that's pretty cool. That's definitely kind of one of those smaller niche areas. And so thank you for that comment. I appreciate it very much. It's great. But I would agree wholeheartedly, just get involved somewhere. I have had companies reach out to me based on my postings on Stack Overflow. How they found my address, I don't know. It's not that hard to guess, I guess. But they're like, hey, we see that you're active in answering these questions. We've got this project we're working on. Are you interested in helping us out? And so it's really kind of a cool thing to start building that network, whether it's on these online communities or part of just your local community. So I really appreciate that comment. And thanks for jumping in, Andrea. Moving on, around the same time I was working as at a local law firm doing kind of two things. One was a non-technological courier where I would run all sorts of paper copies of things to courts and other businesses and other things. But then while I wasn't doing that, they also were building out their technology. So I helped build out their network and also helped write the replacement billing software that they used because this was around Y2K. And so, in January of the year 2000, their billing software was no longer going to function. And so they needed a replacement. And it was a great experience to kind of learn about that. So much technology stuff that I learned there. One of the cool things was in writing that billing software, it was mostly, a client that was installed on Windows computers and, connected to a SQL Server database. But I did build a little bit of a web front end for it where they could really just do some kind of lightweight reporting and see some things. But one of the things that I did was in that client, there was a screen that did a summary for each customer. And it had on the order of, 30 maybe queries that would run to kind of get in the different summaries of, how much have you paid, how much do you owe, how much this, how much that, hours, blah, blah, blah. And at the time, most of the connectivity was over those old modems that, people are maybe not even all that familiar with anymore. It's kind of an artifact of the past. And those modems, not only were they slow from a bandwidth perspective, but there was a tremendous latency that was involved too. And that screen literally took minutes to load over the modem connections. And so I looked at it and I said, you know what, all of these queries that are running really, just return a single value. What if I turned that into one big query that basically said, I'm going to return each one of these into, its own row or its own column, and run one big query that, yeah, it'll take a little longer to send that big one over the wire, and it'll take a teeny bit longer to get all that data. But it was magical, because what happened is, instead of it taking minutes for that page to load, it was literally seconds. Like, the speed up was just tremendous. 100x improvement kind of thing. And that was impressive from just like a performance standpoint. But the more impressive thing is, it enabled a remote workforce. And that may be a little bit obvious, in the era of coronavirus, how important that is. But at the same time, being able to start transforming that law firm, where the billing people did not have to be in the office, that they were already part-time. And so if they could work from home, or, wherever they might be, like, it enabled them to process their work much faster, much easier, without a commute, and their happiness shot through the roof. And I think all of us are definitely looking for more happiness in our employment. And so looking for those ideas that can really change the game are important. And when that all came to an end, like, this is one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in my career. Obviously, of course, they loved me dearly and didn't want to see me go. But they said, look, Greg, you're amazing, and we would love to have you here forever, but we can't offer you anything more than what this is. I mean, we don't need more than some basic help desk type of stuff. They didn't want to continue. The law firm actually ended up merging with another, and they already had some commercial billing software that did everything it needed to and more, and could be supported and everything else. And they're like, we just don't have anything to offer you. You're welcome to stay, as long as you need to, but you need to go. You need to go find a much better job, because you are capable of so much more. And that was honestly, like, super hard to hear at first. Like, it was almost kind of like soul crushing. I'm like, this makes no sense. Like, you say you love me and you're throwing me out the door. Like, how does this work? But as I've thought about it over the years, like, it really is some of the best advice I've ever been given in my career. And I would just echo it to everyone who's, listening to this presentation and watching it, is chances are you are much better than the role you're in right now. And maybe you just need a little bit of nudging from me as a presenter, or, going and participating in your local community events or whatever. But I guarantee you, everyone is capable of more than they're doing right now. We are not static people. We're not cast in stone. We can continue to grow and develop. And I would just encourage everyone to continue growing and developing. And let me be the one that gives you that nudge. Maybe it's not a nudge out of your current job, but it is a nudge to say, hey, I need to go learn that new language or that new technology or whatever it might be. So enjoy that nudge. From there, the job that I got after the law firm was with Siebel Systems. That was a really interesting experience, because I was interviewing in 2002 during the dot-com bomb, and very few places were actually hiring. And Siebel was an interesting one, because they actually flew me out to their San Francisco office and put me up in a hotel and kind of wined and dined me for a day or two, and took us on a tour of San Francisco. As really like a kind of cool experience, kind of the era. And I had a couple other offers that were never quite made, but talking to the managers were like, yeah, we really want to hire you. But this was the only one that actually materialized. And so it kind of was like, well, I like Siebel, they're cool anyway, and I need a job, so yeah, we'll do that. So I was hired straight out of college. We were a remote office. We were here in Salt Lake City, and really supported the automation and localization efforts that were happening in Ireland. And so we were working on systems and solutions that would re-image computers, copy down a new operating system, load new database software, load the Siebel software, and run a bunch of automated tests on it. So we didn't have to have an army of testers clicking and following scripts. And, that was a little bit ahead of its time as well. It was a really neat experience. The problem was that, the dot-com era caught up with Siebel too, and there was layoffs. So I was hired in May and I was let go in July. And that was really kind of a tough thing too, because I'm like, well, we just bought a car, we had a baby, and what am I going to do? You only have one job offer. I need to find something, and you got to do something to stay stay afloat. And luckily, I was able to find something at a company called Fourth Gear not too long after. Um, it was a tough move because, for one thing, it was about a third less than I was making at Siebel, so there was a big pay cut that was involved. They also were looking for really kind of a hybrid role. They had need for like a part-time admin help desk type person and a part-time developer. They were a brand management firm, and so they would develop websites for customers as needed. And so I would kind of help out with that. I'd work with the designers who would hand me Photoshop files, and I turn them into HTML. And I tried to negotiate with them, saying, "Hey, look, my dev work is probably worth more than my admin work. You know, if we can keep track of my time, can you pay me one rate for another, one for a different?" And they're like, "No, no, no. This is just what we can do." And the other thing that was kind of weird about that company is they got hacked shortly before I got there. So they had 3 servers attached to their T1 that were just right on the internet. There was no firewall between them at all. And you know, that wasn't such a big deal in the years before, but security was really becoming a big deal. And so, you know, one of the things that I was able to help them out with in the short time that I was there was, like, let's at least put a firewall in place. You know, we should be limiting the traffic to only what is needed to come in and only to the server that it's needed for. Let's reduce our footprint. Let's get better about staying on top of patches and things like that. But they had some cool things going on. But at the end of the day, it just was not the right job. And so as I've looked back, like, I don't harbor any ill will or anything for Fourth Gear. It's quite the opposite. In fact, like, I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity to figure out that, hey, as great as it was, you know, it was just not the right job for me. This was, you know, similar and kind of a lateral move from what I was doing at the law firm. And why would it be any different? You know, like, I'm still capable of so much more. Luckily, I had started interviewing, you know, after Siebel, and one of the other companies just took a really long time in their hiring process and got back to me. And so we're now on what, my 4th or 5th job of the year, but Magellan Health. And this was a really great opportunity for me to grow. I feel really blessed that I was able to go work there. You know, I was hired as a programmer analyst, and really what I was is a report writer. So I learned a lot about querying databases. Like, I had some experience before, but it was kind of like your entry level basic, you know, select, insert, delete sort of stuff. I hadn't done a lot of more interesting and complicated queries. Certainly hadn't worked with a wide variety of databases. So, you know, a big healthcare company, of course, they had databases all over the place with data spread out between them. And, you know, it was an interesting challenge to try to bring the data back together into one place for reporting. And there were a couple of really cool things that I learned while I was there. One was, it was my first real introduction to JavaScript. And I didn't really understand it from like a programmer perspective. I just knew, hey, I got to copy and paste this block of code into this box here because, excuse me, it's what enables the cascading drop-down lists. So, you know, you pick a country and then you have a list of, you know, related states or whatever it might be. But yeah, it was just JavaScript that handled that, but it felt like magic to me. It felt like magic looking at that front end. And so I kind of became a lot more interested in what we could do with JavaScript. Another thing there was caching information for lookup. So I mentioned we had to query from a bunch of different databases. One of them just had a lookup. It was like, here's an ID and here's its label that's associated with it. So I brought that down in, sorted an array locally, and was able to, you know, kind of treat it as though it were a database join in the report. Instead of having to do that for each row, I could just do it once at the beginning of the report. And, you know, once again, it was like, how did you do this magic? Like, you know, it sped up that report so much, because instead of having to do thousands and thousands of individual queries trying to bring that information in, you know, it was once again, let's just bring it in once and leverage it for each time that that report is being run. There were some things that I absolutely loved about Magellan Health. It's the company that really taught me how important culture is. And so they did some really cool things to foster a positive culture there, where they had casual summer dress, which they basically didn't put any rules around and said, we want to keep it this way, so don't do anything too crazy. So every day I wore sandals, shorts, and a t-shirt to work. And it was so fun because we'd also go outside at lunch. There was a big field right by our building, and we'd play Frisbee. A couple times a week, we'd go play basketball. We had a donut jar where one of those high school cards that give you like buy one, get one free sort of thing. We left that in the jar. And so anybody wanted donuts, they would go pick up 2 boxes. And it was kind of just this self-refilling jar that people would, put their dollar in and get a donut or 2 out. And so anytime anybody wanted donuts, it was great. Probably not so great for my long-term health, but it was really kind of a fun thing to have as part of our group. And we were just really a good, tight-knit, worked well group. It was one of the first places where I worked that I actually did things outside of the workplace with my coworkers, which, whether that's you or not, or important to you or not, it really was just an indicator of, that we were a good, healthy team that were, having fun. It was also the time where I first got involved with a technical community. So Magellan sent me to a conference for the Actuate 7.0 launch, which was their reporting tool. And that was a really neat experience to be able to walk around, be able to look at the sessions and the vendors and everything else that was going on. And as I've reflected back on it, like Actuate is a company that really understood their place in the market. Whenever I had a question on, hey, here's what I'm trying to get this chart to do, like sometimes that's even hard to explain, like if you're drawing it on a whiteboard, and I would send emails to their support team and they would get back to me so fast with, oh, click this option here, do this, configure it like that. And it was such a great resource. And I don't know as though we paid anything extra for it or whatever else, but I'm convinced Actuate figured out that their real value add in the marketplace was not their software product itself, but the solutions around it. So similar to how my consulting company had to switch from selling hardware to services, I watched Actuate over the years switch from selling software to open sourcing it as part of the business intelligence and reporting tools that's part of the Eclipse Foundation. And they just support it. And you know what? Their company's healthy. Like, go look them up on Wikipedia. They've been bought and sold a number of times. They're still profitable. Like, they really figured out their place in the market. And it's really cool to watch that. So yeah, I look back very fondly on those days. From there, I went to work for Northrop Grumman, which was a long time. It was 11 years that I was there. And so how on earth can I even begin to summarize 11 years? Like, it's very tough, but I was able to do a lot of fun things while I was there. Northrop Grumman honestly had like the best backyard barbecue bragging rights. Isn't that fun alliteration? Getting to work on rockets, getting to work on guidance and targeting systems, getting to work on, my personal favorite, the James Webb Space Telescope that I hope one day gets to launch. But being able to support all of those different efforts through software and support was really kind of a neat experience. And I got to be able to touch a lot of different technologies, which is also a little unusual for such a big company to be able to do that. They love to put people into little silos and say, this is your job, this is what we're going to have you do, and you're going to do it well. One thing that I did learn there was our database administrator went to a conference. It was an Oracle conference, and one of the people presenting there was talking about how outer joins just destroy your performance, which is generally true. Like, if you can avoid it, you're going to get better database performance. But he came back with a vendetta that and a solution that we were not going to have any outer joins anywhere in our code anymore. And so anywhere that we were doing an outer join, we were going to replace that with a 0 record. And, it's not a terrible idea, but trying to retrofit that into code broke all sorts of things. And so the lesson there is that, our decisions, our trade-offs, there's always a cost that comes with it. It's never just a flat out benefit. So from an engineering perspective, it's really good to think about, what the benefit is, what the cost is. The environment I worked in there was really unique because our facility was cleared for classified work. I had a security clearance from the United States government to do that work. And as such, they were really paranoid about cell phones. They were paranoid about social media. I wasn't allowed to carry a phone initially that even had a camera. Granted, this is back in 2003. Not every phone had a camera anyway. So it wasn't a huge deal, but it kind of became a bigger deal as time went on. And eventually they kind of understood that it makes more sense to say, hey, we need to have some level of trust with our employees. And so we're going to put baskets out and people can put their phones in them or something like that. And, be able to work with the information that they need to work with and, not be quite as, heavy handed and make for unhappy employees. But the thing that was really hard was the social media aspect. Not that I feel like I have to have a huge social media profile, but it is important for me in my career to kind of maintain that. And so what I ended up having to do was just leverage the network inside of the company. At its peak, it was about 130,000 employees. And so there was definitely somebody out there that could help answer my questions. And the interesting thing that happened is the more that I reached out and the more I built my network, the more I became that person that people said, well, I can just ask Greg. He may not know, but he will know who I need to go talk to. And that really kind of taught me like the importance of networking. And when I left Northrop Grumman, it was from an enormous, enormous company to a little teeny company called WEC that nobody's ever heard of. It's a small company located here in Salt Lake City of about 130 employees. And they have kind of an oversight or regulatory role for the roughly 400 power companies that make up the bulk electric system in the Western United States. And they needed somebody, with my very specific skill set. It was interesting at the time because I showed the job posting to a buddy of mine and he's like, Greg, this is crazy. They don't know you, but somehow they must have gotten a hold of your resume because this job is like perfectly tailored to you as far as, what they need, years of experience, etc. And so, with that little bit of advice, I applied and the rest is history. And what happened is I no longer had an enormous company to help me with my network. I had to work on building it on my own. And so I couldn't look internally. I was the only developer at WEC, and there's 6 companies like WEC across North America. I was the only developer at any of them. So, looking at those companies within my own industry really wasn't much help. And so I had to look just to the local tech community. And so started out meeting with them and working with them and growing and meeting a lot of wonderful people in the community and presented at a lot of local and regional events. Eventually working my way up where a few years back I spoke at Pluralsight Live and the Power Platform World Tour and other, conferences, and it's been super rewarding for me. That's something I've enjoyed, which is a little odd because I am an introvert. I find it very draining to do those sorts of things, but I do find it also super rewarding, and I love meeting new people. I love networking with them, and especially as part of this conference, like talking with the different speakers and stuff. I cannot believe how nice and kind and caring everyone is. Like, it is just so fun to meet so many wonderful people. So I hope everyone will take a minute to stop by Slack or stop by the hallway and say hi, because I would love to meet you guys as well. So please do that. WEC was an interesting one because it was a little bit of a lateral move from Northrop Grumman. It was definitely a lower key job. It supported some other things in my life that were going on at the time that really helped have a lower stress job. But my growth there was once again really limited. And so I started to kind of look at what else was available. And that's what brings us to where I'm at Sundance today. I'm the web systems manager there. I'm in charge of the SundanceCatalog.com website. And it's been a lot of really fun and interesting challenges because the tech stack there is very different. It's a bigger company, it kind of fluctuates depending upon both the time of year and certainly with, the pandemic going on. Our retail stores have been hugely impacted. But it's a bigger company than WEC, certainly. But once again, there's not a lot of developers there, and we need to be able to reach out and have support. And so we've got some great partners that we've partnered with, and definitely continuing to build out the community in ways that I hadn't before. So I've become involved in the Utah Java users group as well, and a few other pieces of the community. And so it's great to continue to build those relationships and be able to shift my focus a little bit from what I've done in the past. So what would my key takeaways be for you? I would like to see everybody continue to build their own networks. I think coming to this conference is a great first step, but don't just show up to the conference. Reach out to somebody on Slack and say you like their comment, ask them what they thought about a session, join the hallway and meet somebody new. It's kind of a hard thing to do to always put yourself out there, but one thing I did at every tech conference I've ever been to is I'll sit down in a room and whoever I end up sitting next to, I'll just introduce myself. And you'll be surprised. Like, people are always super nice and willing to say hi. Maybe the conversation doesn't really go anywhere, or who knows what, but a lot of these people that I've met, I've actually been able to maintain a relationship with year over year. So there's a conference I went to a few years ago in Orlando, and I've stayed in contact with a guy I met from the CDC there. And there's been two really great things. One, every time I go to Orlando, I just ping him and say, "Hey, Chris, I'm coming to town. Are you available?" And he's always really excited to say hi to me as well, which is rewarding. But two, we were looking at some machine learning things, which is what he was involved with at the CDC. And so it was great to be able to have that networking to just bounce some ideas off of and say, "Hey, what are you guys doing? This is CDC. Like, you guys are probably doing things, way, way next level than we're even considering approaching." And so that's been a great thing. And if I hadn't just opened my mouth, this was just, in the expo hall in Orlando, he was sitting at a table and I just sat down next to him for lunch and started chatting. So, you'll never know who you're going to meet and when and where, but always be trying to build your network. Take advantage of those opportunities that you have. I'd encourage you to tell your story. So build out your own digital footprint, make sure your various profiles, excuse me, are up to date. So certainly LinkedIn, but whatever other places you feel comfortable. For me, that was Stack Overflow and Twitter. So I would say go do those if you can. And set goals. Just like I said, I had very intentional goals around what I wanted to do with LinkedIn, with what I wanted to do on Stack Overflow, how many questions I wanted to answer, what I wanted to see my reputation do, reaching well outside of my comfort zone and saying, "Hey, I'm going to, go sit down at a table where I don't know anybody, and I'm going to just start talking to them. I'm going to get to know them." So do that, push yourself, and you'll do well. But with that, I wanted to save some time at the end. I've given this presentation a number of times, like I mentioned, and there's always some great questions. So I'll finish up my talk. And Andrea, if there's been questions that come through, either Slido or in the Slack channels, I'll ask you to kind of help moderate and let me know what people are thinking.
Absolutely. I haven't seen any come in yet. I interrupted you with the one comment that Tracy had for us, which was fantastic. But I am watching to see if anyone has questions. I think I've noticed today that people just seem kind of shy, like they're not ready to ask questions. But that's part of what makes it so much fun. I know that what's really helped me has been attending the user groups and being there in person. And I've gone to conferences, and I am a very shy, introverted person. It's very hard for me to attend conferences, and it's a lot of energy. So I started dressing up as a princess to try to help along with that. And it helps me become somebody else. So I can be outgoing, I can be friendly, and I have an automatic icebreaker with people because people will come up to me and ask, "Why are you dressed like that?" Which is fantastic. So it makes other people do the work for me. So I would absolutely recommend,
Yeah.
getting out in the community. And I also have to second exactly what Greg said. He is super nice, and he just comes and he just sits and talks to you like he's an old friend, and it's awesome, and I love it. So yeah.
And where did we meet, Andrea? We met at the local SQL Server user group, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
I remember the story. I'm going to take just a second to
Go
tell it,
for it.
because I love the story where I go to the user group, and this was in, I don't remember, maybe August or something. This was probably, 4 or 5 years ago. And I go to one session, and maybe I didn't even go. I was planning on going, and you had sent out a call for speakers saying, "Hey, we need somebody for November." And I'm like, I just barely started participating in the community. I just barely wanted to start growing. And I'm like, look, normally I want to attend one of these first and like have a feel for what it's like. It was like super awkward for me to kind of like reach out, like we're describing, like that first step is really tough. But I'm like, "Hey, I, have some thoughts that I'd love to share. Is this something you think the user group would be interested in?" And, you were so kind and so sweet and just said, "Yes, we would love this, please." And it kind of actually became a little bit of tradition. I think for 3 years straight, I presented in November, as I recall. So it was fun.
I know when I looked at the schedule this year and you weren't on for November, I was like, "Oh, okay.
Uh,
We'll
yeah,
have to start a new tradition and put you in another month or something
I
like that."
guess.
But yeah,
I'm just
and
making
I
room for other people to
loved
have
it.
the same experience.
And you're such a fantastic speaker. It's awesome to listen to you. Um, Yeah, I'm still waiting to see if anyone's going to have questions or anything, but
And if they don't, that's just fine. I'm going to be hanging out at the conference, so I'll be in the hallway. I'm monitoring all the Slack channels, so everyone, feel free to hit me up at any time if it's something you'd like to know. These are all being recorded, so check out our YouTube channel after. Please subscribe because I don't know when they're going to show up exactly. We're kind of figuring out these details in this new world as we go. So help us out and subscribe, and you'll get notified there. But I'm always happy to network with somebody, connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'd love to chat with you. I'd love to hear your story. I'm happy to, offer some advice even on, what might be helpful. I'm not always the best resource in that regard, but I can give you my opinion certainly. And that's worth something, I guess, right?
absolutely. I completely agree. Just so quick housekeeping, don't forget to fill out your surveys. If you go down the left-hand side, you can click on the feedback and click on the link to get into the actual survey, which is fantastic. It'll help Greg become an even better speaker,
That's right.
and also help us know how to put on a better conference. Any other, oh, don't forget about the 5 o'clock session today. Greg, you had more details, so I'm gonna let you say that again.
Yeah, so we've got the hallway session coming up at the end of the conference. Be sure to join us. The regular learning sessions are going to end, but it's going to be kind of a fun social event. We're going to have some breakout rooms. There are games and prizes, so it's one you're not going to want to miss. So be sure you join us there.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thank you so much. All right, we'll see you. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep. Okay, goodbye.